Hello everyone and welcome to the Dream Machine 2.0. We are upgrading. As you can see, we have added the R9 280X. It previously had an HD 7770, so this is 3 gigabytes GDDR5 RAM. You could also get the HD 7970, which is basically the same card as the 280X. Again, they're very similar. I think the 280X is clocked higher. That's the only real difference. So, new CPU cooler, new power supply to incorporate the newer graphics card. It does have an 8-pin and a 6-pin power adapter. So there you go. That is all that's new. Same RAM, same hard drive, same everything else, apart from the power supply and the GPU as well that we've added, and that massive CPU cooler, which we have fitted correctly, weirdly. We're going to power it on here, and we'll show you the nice blue LED. If it ever... There you go. So there you go, there it is running. We've got it's a power color, in case you're wondering, 280X. So you can find the 280X these days for around £100, really. That's how much it costs. You can get an HD 7970, which again are practically the same. So, let's get to the benchmarks. We're going to start with BioShock Infinite. We're going to start with Ultra settings, DirectX 11, and the results here are dramatic. In case you followed the previous video that we did, the previous Dream Machine, the HD 7770, should we say, managed around an average of 37 FPS, and as you can see here, we are into the sort of 70s and even as high as the 90s at some point here. The average FPS was 86.46. It's that second one there at the bottom, which is average FPS. The first one's the time duration. You've got the min and the max, which I kind of just ignore. I don't know why they're so 158.29. So we'll take you to the main game now. We'll take you into the main BioShock Infinite options. The benchmark is all well and good, but we want to see how it runs. We're going to show you the settings here. We're going to go presets medium because we had a new GPU upgrade. Obviously it just resets everything to the default, so we'll go for 1080p. We'll go for ultra preset, save those changes. So we're just going for the preset here. We're not really going to mess around. Resolution, we'll go 1920 by 1080. Again, the last time we averaged between 30 and 40 FPS. It averaged about 35 in game. You can see here we are tripling that, at least almost tripling that. We are up into the 90s. Occasionally we hit the hundreds, but most of the time it stays around the sort of 70 to 80 FPS mark. 1080p 60 ultra settings, not really an issue. Now this is not too surprising here. Again, we're going to just go through the same sequence. There's a bit of action, there's a nice bit of throw things, we'll get some effects off. And yeah, you're getting sort of a nice crisp 1080p 60 FPS will be possible in this. In fact, we're, you know, well above 130 right now. But it does sort of sit around the sort of 70 FPS mark. So 1080-60 is pretty easy. It's not really a surprise. BioShock Infinite released in 2013. And the HD 7970, which is again, well, the 280X is just a rebranded HD 7970, was the flagship AMD card of 2012. So it's not really a surprise that we're getting, you know, this level of performance out of it. Again, we'll sit around that. We've got 3 gigabytes of GDDR5 RAM as opposed to the 1 gigabyte that we had before. So that is a massive upgrade. We're no longer bottlenecked by the VRAM. Interestingly enough, the Core i5 3330 is not really the bottleneck here either. There's sort of the GPU usage is in the sort of 80s and 90s. CPU usage is around sort of what, 30 to sort of 40% usage. Goes up to the 60s occasionally. So we aren't, you know, we aren't throttled by GPU, which is interesting, you know, because that is a fairly low-end Core i5. So we shoot our way through this. Find that dude up there. We always miss one person, don't we? So there you go, Bioshock Infinite is perfectly playable at this resolution. So let's get to Batman Arkham City. Let this really struggled last time on the old Dream Machine. Just going to show you the settings. I think we'll call this one Senya, shall we? Going with it in blue. We called our main PC Revan, so we'll go with Senya. For two reasons. One, we're stealing Microsoft's idea of naming it after Star Wars: The Old Republic companion. So in the benchmark, you can see here, you get an average, I think, of about 100 FPS is the average that we hit overall. But in game, this is where it really struggles. Batman Arkham Knight, quite a poorly Arkham City, should we say, quite a poorly optimized game. Of course, Arkham Knight was infamously badly optimized. It does use a lot of NVIDIA technology. I think tessellation, you're gonna have to get rid of that. But just thought I'd show you the performance of this. It's quite bad, really. It can at times hit over 60 FPS, but there are far too many dips. Lowering the settings may be the best idea, but as you're flying around the city, 40 FPS dips down to. So we'll move on to Tomb Raider. We're not doing Rise of the Tomb Raider because, well, we might take a look at Rise of the Tomb Raider later on. But we're going with the same settings as we had before. This is just a comparison to the original Dream Machine video that we did. We got tessellation off, and the Tress FX is what we've turned off as well, the hair physics. So we get 117 FPS average in the benchmark, which is pretty nice. We're using the Ultra preset again. No tessellation and no Tress FX. I think the hair is a little too much, and as you can see, running around in game, you do 1080-60 really is kind of the limit here for this card. Few dips below 60 FPS. The frame rate fluctuates quite a bit, actually. And again, we're not really CPU bound here. I think having faster RAM would certainly help, because it is only Corsair value RAM, 8GB. It's 1333 megahertz, pretty slow. I think that would help us out here. The GPU usage is down in the 60s. We got one CPU core up in the 70s here. But other than that, 1080-60, maybe faster RAM might be the thing. Dishonored 1, we'll move on to now. Again, all the same settings as before, same area as before. Again, this was never an issue with the HD 7770. Jesus, I'm gonna get mixed up here. Whoa, son! The hell, he blew up that whale tank there, the whale fat, whatever it is. Stab that dude in the back. Don't mess with me, son. So yeah, 130 FPS is fairly easy. Again, we're using all settings at high. High is the highest settings that it will go to, and again, we got what, 70 FPS on the HD 7770 on the 280X. It's not really an issue. We're not doubling the frame rate, but we are well above 1080p 60 FPS. Again, we're not using Dishonored 2 because we're trying to show games of around that sort of 2012, 2013, around that era that the Dream Machine, you know, was built, and that's essentially what that card that we had previously was built. It was a 2012 mid-range PC. We've upgraded it from a 2012 mid-range PC now to a 2012 high-end PC. Now we will test, obviously we'll test more modern games on it, but it's just to get a comparison of how big an impact a graphics card upgrade is. So you're getting 1080 120 here. Really, we were getting 1080 60 regular, but if you want 1080p 120 Hz, you know, you've got that upgrade. Essentially, not quite doubling the frame rate, but it is providing a massive boost. Most of these games have provided a massive boost in frame rate. So we'll move on to another bonus game for you. We've added in Metro Last Light, quite a demanding one. We've gone for the very high quality, no super sample anti-aliasing, no tessellation, we're running an AMD card, and no physics, because we're running an AMD card as well. So the benchmark here, results are pretty good. This is more of a CPU stress test, the bit that you're looking at here. So we want to see how much of a bottleneck the CPU is. As you can see, we're GPU bound, it's up 98% usage. We're going to hit a CPU bound area in a second, and we'll see the frame rate dip. So it's a good test of overall sort of system performance here, because this will push the CPU when all these dudes start shooting at each other. It's, again, you can see the CPU usage up into the 70s, up into the 80s. GPU usage does drop a little bit, so we are hitting arguably a little bit of a bottleneck here, but it's not a huge bottleneck on performance, that i5, and that is a cheap i5, non-overclockable. You can see there we're up into the 90s with some cores. The GPU usage does drop, and the frame rate naturally drops because this part is quite intensive. There's a lot of explosions, a lot of physics going on here. You see there, that's a massive, massive jolt for the CPU there. It has to do all those calculations very, very quickly, and it does drop the frame rate there. One of the things about the 280X though is it is quite hot. I mean, it's up to 80 degrees now. CPU usage is fairly reasonable. We're back to being GPU bound, but we're averaging around the sort of 64 FPS, which is not bad. We'll show you the average in a second when this finishes loading. Yes, I want to allow access. Of course I do. So average, we did 3 runs of this. 64 FPS was the average in the first run. In the second run, 64 FPS. So third run I think was a 64. You can see the quality settings there. No super sampling. Motion blur was at low because I don't like motion blur. I don't play with motion blur. So 64 from run 0, run 1, 64, run 2, 64. So your average results were 64.33 was the average results. Max of 115 and a minimum of 13 FPS. So there you go, quite a demanding test. So you can see the impact that upgrading your GPU has. Spoiler alert, it's massive impact. So it's turned this from a 1080p 30 FPS machine into a 1080p 60 for games for 2012. However, we will test more modern games. And that is all for this video, so thank you for joining me. We'll see you again soon, and goodbye.